So the question, dear therapist in my pocket, how can I stop taking things so personally? I'm a fun-loving person and most people really like me. But there's a woman at work who, no matter how hard I try to be friendly, spreads rumours and tries to turn people against me. We're going to unpick that today. We're going to think about the different elements of that. And I'm going to start in what might seem a strange place. I'm going to talk about therapy. I'm going to give you a therapist's point of view, both as a client and as a therapist. And via doing that, I'm going to give you an idea of a different way that you can look, and we can all look, at the way people behave and why they behave the way they do, how we can learn to not see it or take it personally, and how, even more than that, we can use it to do our own work and become more in our own right as part of our journey. So let me start first of all by talking about what happens in therapy. So one of the things, two things that happen in therapy. One is something called transference. And what that is that no matter how much we as a client, and I've been a client for, I was a client during psychotherapy training for over 4 years, 5, 6 or more years, twice weekly therapy. So I've sat in that chair and I know what that chair is like. And no matter how hard we think we can go into therapy and be normal, we can't. What we end up doing is acting out with the therapist everything that we have come to believe and all the ways we've learned to react to everything in our life as a result of the life experiences we have lived. So let me talk about the key beginning of my life, just briefly so you've got the background. My mother died when I was 6 days old, and for the next 2 or 3 years, my grandmother brought me up along with my father and grandfather. And being little, I just believed that she was my mother. I just believed that she was my mother. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know about the ages mothers ought to be or anything like that. I just believed that she was my mother. So I didn't know at that stage that I had lost my mother. My grandmother to me was my mother. And then my father met someone and got together with them and married. And my grandmother moved out. Now I was little and I couldn't understand that, but she moved out. And she moved out with my grandfather to a house. I lived on a farm, and just down the road, my grandmother moved to one of the cottages on the farm. So from my bedroom window, I could see my grandmother hanging out the washing and doing everyday things. And my heart was broken and I was terrified. It was the biggest shock of my life that someone that I thought was my mother and was going to be there forever had moved out, and I didn't understand why. Now that for me was the setup. That was the setup that has driven the rest of my life's journey. And we all have a setup. It may be dramatic. It may appear to be a little thing, but the setup is never a little thing. It may be that a parent loses their parent and becomes depressed. It may be that a parent loses their job. It may be the birth of a sibling and the feelings that we have about that. It may be that we move house. It may be that there is suddenly serious illness in the family. It can be anything. It can be anything, but there is always a setup that leaves us with something that feels so big and so deep that we spend our life resolving it. Now, I want you to hold that in relation to this question. So, why is this woman spreading rumours? Why has she taken a dislike to this woman who everybody else seems to find friendly and likes? And what does that tell us ultimately, eventually, when we come full circle, about her possible setup and why it isn't personal to this woman at all, except that this woman is a catalyst triggering painful memories for the woman who is having a reaction to her. So just hold that thought, and you'll eventually, next in 2022, I've been commissioned to write a book by a well-known publisher who I can't name at the moment, but they publish in 70 different countries. So wherever you are in the world, you'll be able to get it and read it, talking about this very thing, that the journey that we go through in life, from the setup through to the place where we become spiritually awakened and spiritually mature, and that book will trace this journey. So the setup is going to be really important, both in the book and in this talk, and always in therapy, but in life in general. So that was my setup. Mother died at birth, never knew my mother, believed that my grandmother was my mother. My grandmother moved out. I was too young to understand why. It felt like being abandoned. It felt like part of me had been torn away. And I've spent the rest of my life, certainly through to the end of therapy and beyond, working that out. And we all have a setup like that. The woman in the question had a setup. The woman who posed the question had a setup. Everything is interlinked, interconnected. We are players in each other's own journey. So hold that thought. It's one of the key foundations of not taking things personally. So let me tell you, when I decided, for lots of reasons, both personal and the fact that I was going into psychotherapy training, when I decided to go into therapy myself, I chose a therapist who lived just down the road. Now think about that. My grandmother moved just down the road, and without even realising it or being conscious of why I was doing this or making this decision, I chose a therapist that lived just down the road. Not quite as close, but quite close. And I sat in therapy for 2 years with a box of tissues that she had very kindly provided on the sofa next to me, sitting opposite her, absolutely determined that no way was she going to make me cry. Now, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Some people might look at that box of tissues and think, how kind to have provided a box of tissues, because I know I'm going to cry and I don't have to worry about wiping on my sleeve or snivelling because the therapist has provided me with tissues. But why did I want to push that box of tissues away? Because I was terrified that if I started crying, I wouldn't stop. And I believed that, not that she was being kind by putting the tissues there, but actually that she was acting out another part of my story, which was a stepmother with whom I had an enormously problematic relationship, who would hover outside my bedroom or come bursting into my bedroom, determined to break me and make me cry. Now, that was very complicated. I'm not going to try and undo that here. I'm just going to say that was the transference. This woman might try to make me cry and break me like my stepmother used to do. And so I resisted. That's what I believed about the situation. That's what I believed about the box of tissues. Totally irrational, totally unconscious, but vehemently felt. The setup. The day that I nearly left therapy was incredibly painful. I drove up to the therapy and parked in the therapist's drive, and I went to the door as usual, and it was a summer's day, and to my shock, I looked at the lawn just round the side of the house, and I saw a pram. I saw a pram, clearly a newborn baby in it, a very young baby. And the pain, I can't tell you, the pain in my chest and in my stomach. I felt sick, and I realised that what I was experiencing, and I only realised that with my therapist's help, because I went upstairs incredibly angry with her that she would have a baby on the lawn. I mean, totally irrational, but this is what happens in therapy. And rather than taking that personally, she worked hard with me to help me discover what it was. And what it was the feeling of being replaced by another baby, in the way that my father, by marrying someone else and then having another child, felt like he had replaced me. So 2 kinds of abandonment. One, my grandmother moving out and not understanding why. And then my father choosing somebody else and having another baby. It was like, it felt like I fell between. I fell between. And I nearly left therapy for the pain of it, except that she was a very skillful therapist and worked hard to help me discover what my intense reaction and my enormous anger and grief towards her was about. And of course it wasn't about her at all, and it wasn't really towards her at all. It was me acting out my setup and the pain associated with my setup with my therapist. Now, most of us aren't in therapy, but we all do that. We all do that in everyday life. We all do that in everyday life. We are forever working out our setup in our relationships, in our perceptions of things. We are always forming transference. Transference means we are transferring the feelings and the beliefs and perceptions that we have learned or developed from our own setup onto everything and everyone else. That's why no 2 people will watch somebody on the TV and have the same reaction. We will always be perceiving through the filter of our own setup. We will be creating a transference reaction. And in everyday life, we call that projecting. We're projecting the movie that's going on in our own mind and memory and unconscious onto the players that we meet in life in general. So that's the first thing, the importance of remembering that everything is through our perception, and that our perception is based upon the setup and the influences and the experiences, including the pain and the shame that we have known. That's the first thing to hold really tight and clearly in relation to this question, the setup and the way we all continue to act it out in order to eventually resolve it. Secondly, let me talk about my experience as a therapist sitting in the room with clients doing the same to me. So I also know that when a client has a strong reaction to me, because they don't know me, because they really don't know me, they are projecting their setup, their pain, their shame, their experiences onto me. And it's my job to not take it personally, to not have a reaction to it, otherwise I am of no help at all, but to understand that that's what's happening and to work with them kindly, empathically, and really intensely and in depth to discover what the trigger is, what the projection is. One of the strangest I ever had of those experiences was, I don't wear them anymore, but I went through a phase of really liking yellow, and I had a really favourite jumper that I would wear, which was yellow. And I had a client come one day that I didn't know. I was meeting them for the first time, and they were really angry at something. I saw the look of shock in their eyes as I opened the door, and I saw that they were trying to disengage from me as they sat in the chair opposite me, and I could see that there was pain and anger and a desire to go for me somehow. And when I helped them gently to think about that, they told me that what on earth was I wearing that bright yellow jumper for? And then I said, what did it make them think of? And they said, well, you just look like a bowl of yellow custard. You just look like a bowl of yellow custard. What on earth? Why would anybody wear a yellow jumper like that? And holding my nerve and knowing that that came from a place of transference, transferring something of their experience onto me, I learned that one of the, and this person, it transpired, had come with an eating disorder, and they had been forced against their will by a parent who believed that you should clear up everything on your plate and like everything on your plate no matter what it was. She had been forced to eat cold yellow custard, and if she didn't eat it, then it would be brought back again, and she had to try retching, having a really strong reaction. She couldn't bear the skin that had formed on top of the custard, and by my not taking personally what she said about my jumper, which wasn't personal at all, but rather exploring with her what yellow meant and why there was such a strong reaction, we got to the custard and we got to the awfulness of that experience. Again, the setup, again, the transference and the projection and the triggering of past pain by something now that wasn't at all actually personal and which did not need to be taken personally. Now, I guess I'm sharing those things in order to begin to talk about why nothing is personal. Everything comes from our setup. Everything. Everyone is working their setup out. Everyone is working out their pain, their grief, their shame. And most of the time, we are unconscious of that. We think that we are behaving rationally. Sometimes we know that it's not rational, but we don't know why. And also, even though we know it's not rational, the feelings are so intense. I mean, really intense, like childlike intense, that we can't switch them off and we can't do anything about it. And one of these happened to me when I was in hospital having a knee operation a few years ago. I had taken my own medication that I needed to take daily with me in my handbag, only to discover, and I wasn't used to hospitals and I didn't know this is how it worked, only to discover that the nurse needed to have that medication and lock it away in a locker and administer it to me, because while I was in hospital, it seems, she had to be in charge of my medication for reasons of safety and security and the fact that I was in her care. So rationally, I can understand that. But because I was in bed and I was resting from a knee operation and couldn't get out of bed, the nurse reached down by the side of my bed, picked up my handbag and started rooting through it. And I immediately felt such enormous outrage that I told her to put that down straight away, hand it over to me, don't dare go through my handbag. And while that was fine as a response, because yes, she should have asked and she shouldn't have gone through my handbag, the intensity of it told me that there was something else. And as I tried to work that out again, I went back to my experiences with a stepmother who would go through my things. And she would go searching through my things, through my drawers, through my bag. And there was one notable occasion after my grandmother had died, when I had left my grandmother for the last time and brought a handkerchief of hers away, and I had put it in my bag, and suddenly it wasn't there, and I couldn't find it anywhere, and I knew that my stepmother had had such mixed and intense feelings towards my grandmother, because I had remained always, and this is part of the problematic bit, and I was part of that too, so there's no blame here. I'm just sharing a story and observing what happened. Because I never let go of my grandmother being my grandmother, I could never accept my stepmother. And clearly and obviously and understandably, that created intense feelings in my stepmother, who wanted to break that bond because of her setup and because of the intense feelings that she had in terms of her past. So everything interacted. But the crucial thing I'm talking about now and remembering was my intense reaction to a total stranger intending helpfully to pick up my handbag and find the medication for me, because I was struggling after an operation and couldn't, and was quite taken aback by the intensity of my reaction, which was clearly totally illogical to her, and which I couldn't begin to explain to her. So do you see how, no matter how cleanly we believe, and obviously I've used exaggerated and extreme examples to try and show you what I'm talking about and to make a point, but we are all acting out our setup, and we are all left with extremely intense, childlike, childish, with the intensity of a child's feeling, without the understanding that an adult would have, we are all reacting to those experiences until we become conscious of them and aware of them. So let's think how that translates into normal everyday life. Let's think and apply that to every situation we find ourselves in. We are all players in each other's movie. Why do I say movie? Because all reality is subjective, because it's seen through the film or filter of our transference, i.e. transferring past experiences onto present people and situations without realizing it, and of our projections, that is, projecting out the unconscious bits of us that we're not aware of. We are all walking through the world, we are all interacting in life through a mixture of transference and projection. And do you begin to see how therefore nothing is actually personal? If something that someone is feeling, or if something that someone is thinking that they see in us, actually either transference from someone or something they knew before, or projection, a memory only partially recovered or unconscious projected onto us, then clearly none of that is personal. None of that is personal. And that is the vast majority of the situations that we encounter excuse me, in our lives. So then let's move to this situation, because this feels personal. Here is a woman who is fun-loving, outgoing, friendly, who most people like. So let's take that one first. Here is a woman who enjoys life, enjoys other people, interacts easily, is friendly and outgoing, and people like her. Let's just think about that. If you are someone who is equally happy, friendly, outgoing, and you don't have bits of you that you want to hide or are ashamed of, and you don't have bits of you that don't relate as easily as she does, you're going to love her. You're going to really enjoy her company. You're going to feel like her equal, and your relationship with her is going to be unproblematic, a good one. But just supposing that you are someone whose setup has led to you feeling not worthy, not good enough, hurt, frightened of other people, bitter at life. You're not outgoing and fun-loving. You've known stuff. Your setup has not left you with that ease of relating and interacting. It's left you awkward. It's left you full of pain. It's left you full of fear. And it's left you believing that no matter how hard you try, other people are not going to like you. So rather than being fun-loving and outgoing, you have learned to be cautious, frightened, wary, to hold back. Maybe people find you harder to get to know. maybe that means that you're not as likable. Maybe it's harder to like you. And so how are you then going to feel when you encounter someone who does with ease what you have never been able to do? You are going to feel challenged by them. You are going to feel hurt by their popularity. It is going to feel like it rubs salt into the wounds. It's going to make you feel even more unworthy and less than you do already. So you're going to resent that person. Maybe the way you work your resentment out is that you spread rumours about people. Maybe you want to persuade people that this person isn't as likeable as they seem to think. Maybe you want to spoil their reputation. Maybe you want to taint their character or personality. Something is going on. Something is going on that is beyond this person's outgoing nature to fix. That person, the one that spreads rumours and resents her, is in a lot of pain, is working her setup out, but it is not personal. When you start to take on board that we all have a setup, that we all have hidden pain that we can't explain for reasons of it feeling childish or not important, or that other people wouldn't understand, or that it just seems illogical and like we shouldn't feel these things when we're a grown-up. All those things and more. These things are so hard to explain, and so all we can do is try and hold them in, and we're horrified when they leak out. Horrified when they leak out. But if we could all walk through the world more aware of everyone working out a painful setup and the consequences of that painful setup. And actually, I want to say, some people will say, well, I didn't have a setup. I had a wonderful, wonderful experience as a child. That's great. But then you had a wonderful experience as a child. And you might encounter envy, jealousy. Sooner or later, you will come up against someone else's transference. Sooner or later, that is going to happen. And that is your challenge on your journey. So I wanted to begin with a therapist and client's perspective on all of this, and to then generalize it out into our common everyday lived experience in the world. And now I want to take it one step further. And I want to add a spiritual perspective to it, which is why? Why are we on a journey like this? Why do we experience a setup? Why do we find ourselves trying to work it out? Why do we hit crises where the pain or the fear or the shame is so great we are suddenly catapulted into another place of discovering another part to the jigsaw that is our emotional and psychological and spiritual journey? I would say, and you don't have to agree, it is simply that I'm sharing my view. I believe that we are all part of one field of compassionate, benign, loving, wise, and forever expanding and becoming more consciousness. That we incarnate for this experience, and then we go back to that field of infinite consciousness, and that through our journey and our personal becoming more, we have added to the becoming more of the sum total of the field of consciousness to which we all belong. And in that sense, if that is so, and that is what I believe as I go through life, that makes more sense to me than anything else I've come across. If that is so, then we are forever offering each other the gift of either being a catalyst for the next part of another's journey, as this woman who is fun-loving and outgoing and popular has clearly been a catalyst for the other woman's next stage of the journey, because the woman who is wanting to spread rumours and will not accept this woman's friendship has actually been challenged to relive the pain that's causing that behaviour, and is being invited through that pain to explore it, to work out the transference and the projection, and then go on, if she can, and maybe she needs help, to go on to the final stage of the journey, which for me, both as a psychotherapist and as a spiritual traveller on a journey, it's the same. The next stage of the journey involves our letting go of the transference and letting go of the projections, and instead seeing everything through the eyes of grace, whatever word you want to use, a compassionate understanding that we are all on a journey of working it out. A compassionate, benign, kindly understanding, a loving understanding that we are all working it out. We are all working out our setup, our beginning, our consequent experiences that will have built on that setup and that beginning. We are all working that out. That is our journey of this lifetime. And the culmination of it is the point at which we gain the humility to realize that everyone is doing that. The compassion to understand that everyone is doing that. And the wisdom to use that in a spiritual way that helps us to become more. And when we reach that point, we really do not take anything personally. We either realize that we are a catalyst in someone else's journey, offering them an invitation to move on to another stage in their journey by working with what reaction we evoke in them, which is not personal. We are simply re-triggering an experience, and that re-triggering is a catalyst to do the next bit of work. So we realize eventually, with wisdom and compassion, that either we are a catalyst in someone else's journey, and therefore we are their gift, And we can see that in a loving way, in a generous way, that means we don't have to take it personally. We are their gift. Or when it happens to us the other way round, we see it that they are a catalyst in our journey. So I was a catalyst wearing my yellow jumper. My therapist was a catalyst by having a baby in a pram on the lawn. The nurse rummaging through my handbag was a catalyst for me. I received the gift of the catalyst by doing my work, by working out what it re-triggers in me, by realizing it is not personal, by realizing it isn't about the other person, it's about me doing my work, and that the gift is that I have been offered a catalyst which will propel me into the next stage of doing my work. So for me, nothing is personal in that way. Nothing I do is personal. If I have behaved or spoken, if I've acted in a way that is unloving or inconsiderate, then it is my job and my responsibility to see that and put that right to the best of my ability. And in doing so, that may be that I offer the other person a contrasting experience from the one they've known. Maybe the way I behaved is a way that they've experienced before and they've not received a sorry, they've not received an apology. And in that way, maybe I'm a catalyst in a different way by offering a different experience. But I am nevertheless a catalyst. And it may be that I am such a powerful catalyst that that person in their pain cannot and will not accept my apology, cannot and will not see me as anything other than the transference through which they saw me when I acted or spoke in a particular way and triggered their setup and their pain. But do you see how at no stage whatsoever is this personal? And do you see how we are forever and always interconnected in our individual but overlapping journeys, and how we are players in the movie of each other's lives? But I also want to say that we are players at a much bigger level as well, because sometimes we are players in a journey that involves generational trauma, generational pain. And sometimes that's why we come. Sometimes we come in love and generosity. Sometimes we are incarnate, not to heal pain of our own, but to actually help heal through our experiences and working through them, pain that is existing at a generational level, or bigger still, at a collective level. It isn't always about our individual pain. The setup may be, but it may spur us on to become a campaigner, a changer, someone who speaks out. It isn't always about our own individual journey. And sometimes our pain and suffering is therefore a gift because others see it and it makes them decide to bring about change. Do you see how complex and interconnected this can be? And so even more how nothing is actually personal, but that everything in life is about the challenge to become more, the challenge to know and love the unknown bits in ourselves and in others, and to walk through the world knowing that everyone is working it out. Often that phrase is used in posts and memes to mean something like, none of us know what we're doing and we're all just making it up as we go along and working it out. And I think there's a truth to that, because I often talk, and will do in the book, about the process of forgetting. Because we couldn't have an experience as powerful as the one our setup gives us if we were still remembering where we came from and why we were here. It has to become real. It has to become a movie that feels like real life. And so we have to forget, and we spend a lifetime gradually remembering. And I would say that spiritual awakening is a process of remembering. The setup is so painful or so confusing that we forget. We forget. We are plunged in to the reality, as it seems, of this life and all that we are learning to believe about it and feel within it. And we forget where we come from, who we are. We forget connection. We forget oneness. We forget that we are all part of the one stream. That actually we all beat with one heart. We forget. And so we are plunged into what feels like the reality of this dream, this movie. And only gradually, by being presented with catalysts, invitations from others and from other experiences, do we begin to work out and to remember who we really are and what we really have inside us. That we are all one. And through the painful experience that the setup sets off, we forget oneness, and we believe that we are separate, with all the pain and the fear and the shame and the envy and the rivalry and all the other feelings that we struggle with in this apparent human reality that we incarnate into. And then eventually we work it out and we reach again a sense of oneness, of belonging, of being a spiritual being, having a human experience. And that frees us. And we no longer take it personally. We actually experience gratitude, and we develop wisdom and a compassion beyond anything that we have known before, because we get it and we see. We see that nothing that we have done has been personal, that nothing anyone has done to us has been personal. And we accept with gratitude the gift that this life has given. So there you have it. There is my attempt to answer that question. And I just want to say at the end, having come full circle, that the person who sent me that question has no responsibility whatsoever to try to fix that situation. None whatsoever. And she has every right to withdraw, to look to her own boundaries, to protect herself, because that is her journey. And in her journey, she is working things out. And part of her journey is working out how to manage meeting someone like this. And that's okay. She doesn't owe this woman the gift of trying to work it out. She can try if she would like to. That's a very generous thing to do. But she's not obliged to. She is on her journey. And she is part of this other woman's journey. And this other woman is a soul just like she is, with a journey to travel, with stuff to work out, with transferences and projections to let go of. It is her job to become more. It is her job to awaken. So while we walk alongside each other, we have to also know that we are all souls on a journey, and we cannot and do not need to walk another's journey for them. We are a catalyst, a gift, and as Ram Dass says so beautifully, we are all just walking each other home. I wish you the unfolding of your journey. I wish you the wisdom of being able to work out your setup, your beginning, the pain, the joy, the shame, the bits that help, the bits that make it hard. I wish you joy on the journey, and I wish you the unfolding of that journey to the point where you too can let go of your transferences and your projections, and to leave behind that state of forgetting, and once more remember who you are, where you belong, who we all are, and that we all come from oneness. We go back to oneness, and in between we play out a movie in which we are all players in each other's stories and each other's lives. May that knowledge and that wisdom help you when you hit a bumpy patch. I've just had a question. I've got 2 minutes before we ping out of this. What if you feel lost in that journey? Then that is part of the journey. Sit with it. It's a process. If you feel lost right now, stay with that. Go into that place. Know that you are, for now, going through a process that will lead to the next stage of your journey. Nothing remains the same. We don't remain lost. We all go through a process of feeling lost many times, and without it we would not discover that we are more. Without it we wouldn't discover the next part of the journey. Trust the feeling of being lost. It will take you somewhere. Now, the clock is ticking, and this is going to end in a moment because we only have the hour. So I don't want to end without being able to say thank you so much for joining this evening. Thank you for coming along, being part of my journey and letting me be part of yours. If you have a question you would like me to answer, please direct message me or use the form on my website. All the links are in my bio. But thank you for this evening. I hope it's helped. And for now, stay safe, stay blessed. Big love. Don't forget to enjoy the tea and cake. Bye for now. Bye.